So, okay, hello. Today we're going to talk about the key to cybersecurity program success. And I've implemented many cybersecurity programs and different parts of programs and fixed programs and did all kinds of stuff with programs. So I have some insights I've been learning over the last 30 years, and I wanted to share some of those with you. I know in the first few years of my career, there was a lot more learning going on, but now it's more streamlined, more quality control management now. So that's what we're going to learn about today. We're going to cover a number of different topics. Safan. And
yeah, actually, it's a good coincidence. Currently, I am working on a review for a large cybersecurity program for a company. It's just a coincidence, but my current project is about also reviewing a cybersecurity program about process governance, resource management, etc. In the all aspects. Yeah, it's actually also another good coincidence for today.
Yeah, those are all great questions. Yeah, this is, if people are, the one thing I find, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, is that a lot of people that get slotted into the leadership role in cybersecurity come from technical background. And you really need to have a soft skill set for management and understand how executives work and how the executive team works. And so we're going to really talk about true program management today. We won't talk about too many threats or vulnerabilities, but we might touch on a few here and
there. Yeah, it's always a fun topic to talk about technical things, but yeah, you're right. Because also in my current project, I saw that if there are 200 people, maybe more than 200 program people, it's all about people management, programming, planning, because whatever you do, it doesn't matter if there are that much of people, you have to have a system to manage them. And that was one of the key points, critical points to do that. I am also excited to see that keys for that cybersecurity program, because I have a living example and I need your experience also here. I will make that comparison and see what's actually going on and what they should do.
Yeah, ask lots of questions, send questions to the chat box, and we have a couple of the management team here, Safan and Harry, and they're going to be helping run the show here. But on that regard, with what you're talking about, I know exactly what you're talking about, because a lot of times, a lot of new graduates from masters of cybersecurity and programs, those kinds of things, come to me and they say, "Oh, I want to be a manager," and I'm like, "Well, be careful what you wish for, because once you get into management, you don't actually do cybersecurity anymore. You do people management, and it's a different beast." I ran a program for NTT Data and Morgan Stanley, which is a Fortune 50 bank. Probably number one bank in the world, maybe, or close to it. And I had 130 people in my team. I had 5 teams. I was developing some new teams, but they were based in New York and Halifax and Toronto and of course India and all over the place, right? And it's really about care and feeding for the team. Make sure they're getting paid. Make sure their benefits are working. If they have problems, hiring people all the time, right? Not necessarily hiring people, but always growing, always recruiting, always hiring. And then of course, then there's the mentorship part. So that was the key part of my job, was to help mentor the new graduates, right? To listen to them. A lot of them get pigeonholed in those big companies into specific roles. And of course, they have all these great, all this knowledge that they've gained in university that they want to use. So a lot of them come to me and say, how can I move around a little bit? So I've, helped move them around a little bit and give them some chance to practice their skills, because that's the most important part, is once you get all this knowledge, you want to practice it, right?
Yeah. Also, I observed one thing, and after this remote working, initially it was very okay for a company to find the right, especially cybersecurity resources. But now everyone can work from home, and it's really hard to find that expertise in the industry, because that guy may live in Germany and work for America. Who paid more, who find the resource first, they just get that resource. And I see that in the industry, even if they want to hire, relocate, or remote working, it became really hard to find those resources. I believe the other reason is that when people working from office, they are seeing that cybersecurity, they are having an attention with that team connection, face-to-face connection, and based on that interest, they are just changing their careers and become cybersecurity. Also, currently, cybersecurity is hard to enter. There's an entry barrier. You need to have a knowledge to enter the industry, and it's not easy to build. And we also experience that now in the industry, there are not many new graduate cybersecurity interested people. I've got a couple of requests from other people to get a remote membership and mentorship program. I'm just giving session, heads up, what cybersecurity is, what is the mindset. I believe if you're in the same location, we work from office, that people will come to us, talk to us, ask questions, and we'll say that, okay, I want to be in this area. Now it's also harder for them. When they start the project or team, they are just following that path, because that mentorship is one of the key issues. And also when I talk to other people, they all are saying the same. In the industry, now it's really hard to find, especially new graduate people. They are just choosing other area.
It's a busy market. There's lots of opportunity out there. It's like 3 million vacancies, right? So it's crazy. But I don't mind. I've been working remote for many, many years, so I don't mind. Usually I go on site for a few weeks and then I work remotely and then I go back on site usually. So it's a little bit of a hybrid kind of model. But I can tell you one thing though, the agile people must be hurting, because those scrums are so much fun and you miss all the scrum action when you don't have people like butting in front of people and talking or things like that. So
yeah, exactly. I believe we are on time and we are good to go. Just before start, let me, everyone, you already seen that on the chat. We will have a survey 50 minutes later in the 8:30 p.m. In that survey, if you provide your ISACA membership ID, your CPs will be automatically uploaded to your accounts. Please check the chat and don't forget to fill that survey. That's basically you need to do just to get that CPs. We will type the link and everything on the chat. Also, if you have any question, just on the time, you can type it in the chats. I will get the logs and I will ask that question on time to Mark. Don't hesitate to put your question. I believe we are good to go, Mark.
Great.
It's awesome. On you.
Well, thank you to the Istanbul chapter. This is my second presentation with them. I met Harry probably a few years ago now, just post pandemic. We actually haven't had coffee yet, none of that delicious Turkish coffee or any of that sort of stuff, but I did spend about a year in Turkey. So it was, so I reached out to a lot of people and it was nice to be there and part of the culture. Turkey is a great place. It's the largest city in Europe, actually, 16 million people. So it is busy, just like Harry was saying before, and Stefan, trying to get from one part of town to the other part of town can take hours, right? So the traffic is very bad and there's some crazy drivers there too. But it's lots of fun, right? So much history there too. Wow. Without further ado, so today we're going to talk about the keys to cybersecurity, and this is something that I've learned over my career, and I wanted to share it with people. I will be doing, I think, some training coming up in February, March in Dubai, and maybe in Arizona. So in case you're interested, you can use the QR code. You can register on my YouTube and follow me on LinkedIn. And of course, there'll be announcements about that. And hopefully I'll get back to Turkey sometime in the new year and visit my friends there and colleagues. Okay, so I don't know if you're a fan of The Matrix. It's a little bit old now, but certainly I think this is a good quote. Sooner or later, everyone's going to realize that there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And that's something that we were just talking about, actually, is if you're a new graduate and you have all this massive knowledge about cybersecurity, the one thing you want to do is flex that muscle, right? You want to exercise it a little bit because getting the experience that you need in order to apply that knowledge is going to take many years. my first 7 years was spent with an insurance company where I did everything. So I was very fortunate. I was a one-man show, running the HRS, doing systems engineering, network engineering, and doing some software engineering as well. So I got to do a little bit of everything. I developed some systems there, actually, applicant tracking and skills inventory systems. So it was good. I was very lucky. I'm very fortunate and thankful for that. So let's talk about the path a little bit, okay? Oh, and speaking of my path, here's some of my customers. So I have a lot of experience. The largest cloud I worked in was with Mirantis. You can see in the middle there. It's a petabyte cloud, so it's very large. Not too many petabyte clouds around, but that is definitely one. I worked in federal government, in the commercial sector, mostly in the US, also in Canada, and just finished a ISO 27000 or GRC framework implementation for a company that does data migration for legacy ERP systems to SAP. The cloud's run by IBM, of course. So lots of experience, lots of lessons learned that I'm going to share with you. So the first question that we need to ask ourselves when we get asked to lead a cybersecurity program or any kind of implementation is, why are we doing this? So this is what I've learned. I've learned that first rule is there's usually some revenue attached to it. There's a new customer maybe who's willing. We've done an RFP with them. We've won the RFP bid, and now it's time for us to get compliant. And they come to us and they say, okay, so where's your GRC framework? Where's your cybersecurity program? Do you have ISO? What are you running? This cybersecurity framework, COBIT, what is it that you're running? Okay, and we want to see it. So we want it to be independently audited. So that's very important. So that's usually the first reason. The second reason is because some regulatory agency has asked for it. And this does happen from time to time, especially if you're in the US federal government. You're now mandated to implement this cybersecurity framework. And actually in Canada is kind of like the poor cousin of the US. So Canada often adopts whatever the US is doing. And that's what they've done, is they've adopted the NIST cybersecurity framework. And now they're actually licensing registers and hiring auditors to go around and audit government companies, just like they're doing in the US, except they're using, I think, the capability maturity model in the US to do that. So revenue attached to it, there's some regulatory requirement. It's also possible, and I've also seen this, the board of directors has come and asked. And the board of directors, because they're guiding the ship in a direction, they see the horizon, they see the opportunity coming, and they know in some markets you have to have a verifiable cybersecurity program in place. So they will hire people to implement those. And I've done that before, and very successfully, and onboarded multi-million-dollar contracts right afterwards because of that process. So what is your strategy? So you need to have a plan. So if you're new to the game, you may have some ideas about what the plan would look like or what you'd like it to be like. But my advice is that you check with what's worked and what people have done before, and you do some research, and then you do whatever it is that works, because that's the most important thing. It's got to be doable. And if it's been proofed by some other company, then that's a leg up for you. That'll give you an advantage, okay? So my first question always is, when I'm hired, is, am I here to clean up somebody else's mess? Because sometimes somebody's been hired to implement a cybersecurity framework and they haven't followed a framework, and they've tried to do things in a sort of a haphazard, customized way without any experience or knowledge about what needs to be done. And they've made a bit of a mess. And now the company realizes that, and they say, okay, they're going to fire that person and hire somebody who can come in and fix it. So sometimes you have to come in and clean up a mess. You also have to have an idea of what kind of framework it is that you want to implement. Now, again, as I was mentioning, this cybersecurity framework, very popular. We can talk about that in another session, maybe in great detail. It has 108 control points for any of the auditors or geeks out there that are interested. And it doesn't necessarily have a management system, but it could have if you wanted to impose one on it, because certainly in the identify area, there's an opportunity to implement some governance around the process. There is a governance slide in there, but it's not very well baked. It's again, very new and high level. But remember, NIST cybersecurity framework was developed by the NIST organization for government use, and now some commercial enterprises are trying to adopt it. So it's a bit challenging. Of course, ISO 27001, if you live in Europe, you know about ISO, developed by the UK government. It's probably the best. It does have a management system, and it has 261 control points, 148 in the management system, and 113 in the integration of Annex A. So you have to make a choice. Part of your development of your strategy is what framework will you follow? Maybe you'll follow COVID. Maybe there's some other frameworks out there that you'll follow. Will your strategy include a communication plan? Now, I can't say enough about how important it is to do the dog and pony. Find out who the stakeholders are when you first arrive at the organization. Plan some meetings, short meetings with them. Don't make it a long meeting. 15 minutes, certainly probably enough. 30 minutes is a lot of time. 1 hour, I would never book a senior manager for 1 hour unless I'm going to pay him directly, because the CEO might be asking, what am I doing with him? But you want to have at least a first draft of your strategy to present when you have that meeting. And then you want to ask some questions to the stakeholder. You want to say, okay, so what do you think about this plan? Where do you see the pitfalls are? And take notes, make sure you take good notes. What could you benefit from? So how could your organization or your portfolio within the enterprise benefit from such a program? And take those notes down, because when you create version 2, which is the one you're going to present to the executives, you want to include all this information from all the stakeholders, because what it will do is it will bolster your position. Because what does the CEO or CFO do when they get a strategy, or the board of directors? They go and they ask the managers, have you seen this? Have you reviewed it? And if you've already sat with them and talked to them about it, then they know. And of course, they give you the nod because they look at it and they see that they're covered off in that strategy. So it's a good piece of strategy in itself to do that. How you engage employees. It's digital transformation for most companies. Most companies have never had a cybersecurity program. So it's a big thing for them. They're going to become more secure. Will they have to do more things? Maybe, maybe not, but they'll definitely have to be, their awareness will have to be higher, because they're going to have to know how to detect any type of threats that maybe have come through the system. You know, there's lots of different types of phishing attacks. There's no system that is 100%. And yeah, so you need to make sure that your awareness and your communications, your business communication plan covers off on these people, and you talk to the stakeholders for your strategy. As I mentioned before, meeting with the stakeholders one-on-one to get their feedback is very important. You need to build a plan. So we're going to talk about here in like 20 slides or less about cybersecurity framework, the program. My advice is to build a plan, because you're going to be gathering a lot of knowledge, and you're going to have to park that knowledge somewhere so that it becomes useful. If you just file it away in a shared drive, or you put it into some Excel spreadsheets, you're going to lose it's going to be like a data lake, right? So unless your quantum computer can pick up all the data in the data lake, you're going to be challenged a little bit, because there's some things that might just fall through the cracks, and you don't want that to happen. So if you follow the framework and you build a nice annual cybersecurity program plan, this will become a very, very useful tool. And and one of the most important things that I've learned about having a business plan for cybersecurity in the program is that it demonstrates a couple of things. It demonstrates, first of all, you're going to write about the company. So who is it that you're working for? Is it a government entity? Is it a bank? Is it pharmaceutical? Is it a manufacturing company? What do they do? Okay. So you need to acknowledge that right up front in your plan, because the executives might read this, and the governance board will probably read it. So they want to see that you recognize the fact that they're not in business to give you buckets of money so that you can build an awesome cybersecurity program. They're in business to provide a service or a product, and they want to see how you're going to run the program that's going to support that. And that's what the business plan does. Now, if you're new, you might not be onto this yet. I'm not sure if any of the actual schools are teaching these kinds of soft skills, but this is definitely a very important part of it. And the annual business plan should be reviewed. This is actually the time, all the guys in finance will tell you this, and a lot of the program managers, they'll say, this is the time right now when you get your budget approved for next year, right? So if your annual plan ends on December 30th and you start a new plan, then you should already have a good handle on what you're going to be doing next year. If you want to get money for that, you know, what kind of resources are you going to need? What kind of capital projects are you going to run? What's your program look like? How many bodies do you need for that? All these little details, they all have dollars attached to them. And having a business plan helps the management team to understand. And then you need to, in this business plan, you need to map what it is that your program is going to do and how it's going to support. So first of all, you need the strategic goals and objectives for the company. And then you need to map what it is that your program is going to do to support that. And I can't really go into a lot of detail in that because it is a bit of a specialty area, but I can say that, you know what, if your company has a goal, for instance, most companies have like control costs or growth, you know, consume some of the market share, right, and expand, right, services. So those types of things you have to talk about. How are you going to do that? So we're going to talk about performance metrics later on, KPIs, and that'll give you some clues on how you might tackle that. And then, of course, there's program governance. So you have a governance team. My suggestion, strong suggestion, is that cybersecurity is not an IT thing. It's an enterprise thing, first of all. Okay, so and there's people who own risk for cybersecurity all across your organization. So each of the portfolios that you have within the executive team, those are generally the people who I target to sit on my governance committee. And usually I meet on a quarterly basis, and we spend like an hour to review the program and get their feedback and deal with any issues. So that's very important. So the governance team is important. Again, performance monitoring, we're going to talk about in a minute in a little bit more detail. And critical success factors, I'm not going to talk about today, but when you look at the budget, we're going to go over what a budget might look like. So that will give you some ideas of what critical success factors. Obviously, you need capital, or you need operational budget, and you need resources. And then you might need some other things too. So we'll give you some ideas about what that looks like. Okay, and then in your business plan, you're probably going to talk about some of the other roles and responsibilities they're going to be carrying out, just so that it's not a surprise to the organization. Sometimes because if you look at the NIST framework or you look at any of the other frameworks, you're not going to see the word internal audit mentioned, right? But I like to make sure that the role of internal audit is very important. Verify and validate the program is working as planned, right? So I like to acknowledge the fact that internal audit is part of that process. And I like the governance committee to also understand, and the senior executives, that internal audit will be reviewing this program. Okay, and then there's, of course, risk management, and we're going to talk more about that, and continual improvement. And I have a plan, a little strategy that I use in order to make risk management just purr along, and also continual improvement, again, because that's where the capital budgets are really. Business communications, I talked about a little bit already. And then there's awareness training. Those two things I'm not going to get into too much detail today. And then there's, of course, document and record retention. And I didn't put it in red because I didn't want to alarm anybody, but I did put it in burgundy because it is pretty royal for most programs. If you want internal audit or you want external certification, you're going to need to keep evidence. And learning how to control documents that are important to the program, what we call controlled documentation, or record retention, is going to be very fundamental in the process. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time in the business plan talking about what records will be kept and why. Okay, so that's the business plan. So I won't talk any more about that. Now I'm going to get back into the strategy a little bit more and talk about the strategy. So the strategy really touches on a number of different areas. This is a little pencil chart that I use for regular status reporting, and it's broken down into a couple of different sections here you can see. So, first of all, when you kick off the program, you're going to be doing a gap assessment for the program, and then you're going to be doing a risk assessment. And, I like to follow the ISO approach when it comes to risk assessment and gap assessment. So 2701 is very close to my heart. We're doing the gap assessment on clauses 4 to 10, and we're going to do the risk assessment on Annex A to justify controls in or out of scope. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more too, because that's managing the control framework is so important to controlling costs and also managing risk, very important. So those have to be done up front. And then we need to do some business planning. So there's a number of different things you can see. We already talked about performance, budget, and roadmap, and resource planning. Then there's the program documentation. So there's going to be a number of processes or procedures that get created. I like to create where I have educated, smart, intelligent people working in the cybersecurity team. I like to have practice documents. So these are documents that tell what the goals and what the outcomes are of the different processes, but they don't go through step-by-step practice, step-by-step process workflow, because it's not needed, because these people know what to do. You just have to tell them, you know, let's do a vulnerability scan, and away they go, and they do it. Okay, and then there's operations. So there's the program, which is the governance, the risk management, and then there's operations that handles things like vulnerability management and testing, QA, that type of stuff. Incident handling could fall into the cybersecurity lab, or it could be falling into the operations lab. It's debatable. And then there's monitoring, very important, of course. And then there's capital projects. So capital projects are those big improvements that you want to make to the program. So maybe you want to implement multi-factor authentication. Maybe you want to implement VPN technology. Maybe you want to implement some new kind of deep packet inspection for malware and threats. Maybe it's a new SOC. These things are big ticket items. They're probably going to require RFP if you're smart and you go to market. Some people might just give it to their friend who works in a different company, but it's better for the company if you do an RFP, and it needs to be reviewed every 5 years because technology changes every 5 years. So the capital project is one of these big projects. It's going to be $1 million, 500,000. Maybe it's going to be more than $1 million. It's going to be a big ticket item. It's going to get done. There's going to be a lot of spending and a lot of focus on it. Okay. And then, and now you're going to switch to steady state. So after you've gone through your strategy, you've done your implementation, and now you want to switch over to steady state. Now you have quarterly governance committee reporting. So based on the key performance indicators, you're going to report to the governance committee. If you follow the ISO framework, there's a number of items, which I'm, again, not going to go through, but I usually put those items into something called a terms of reference document. Terms of reference speaks to the governance committee, what its job is, what it's supposed to be doing, what the inputs, the outputs are, how it's going to be recorded, who's going to report on it. And then there's of course a roster of senior managers who get assigned to participate in it. They're stakeholders usually, so they want to participate. They want to say what's going on. Pardon me. And then I give that terms of reference to the chief executive officer, the president, and ask him or her to sign it. And that way there's, they know what's going on. And if they have questions, they can ask questions at that time. So it's a good thing to do. And then you have these quarterly meetings. So you have a standing agenda. If it's based on ISO, there's I think 10 or 11 items that you have to report on every quarterly meeting, including the performance. So that needs to be covered. And then of course, getting back to the records management, you need to have evidence, meeting minutes, schedules for these people to meet, attendance, things like that. So all these details are very important and not that well known. If you've, if you've come from the IT world and you've been promoted into a cybersecurity leadership role, some of these things that I'm talking about are probably seeming a little bit foreign. Not that I'm from Canada and I'm foreign anyway, but the fact that these are just things that you've never had to deal with before. Maybe touched on budgeting, but probably a lot of the other things like program management and capital projects you might not have done. So these are important skills to have. And running a governance committee. So usually, if I'm the person who's implementing the program, I'm usually the chairperson for the governance committee. And I try to hand that off to the cybersecurity manager at some point, but I want to guide it through the first couple of meetings to make sure that we're making progress, because there's a lot of touching and feeling going on. People are trying to get familiar with what it is you're doing and they're not sure. So it's important that you have the expert front and center so they can ask questions. And then it's important also so that I can set the program up like a senior architect would in order to make sure that it's on the right track. So governance committee, and then there's the day-to-day management. So this is a cybersecurity leader's job to make sure, that the risk assessments are getting done, that when there's a governance committee meeting coming up, you might have to gather metrics. You might start 2 weeks before the meeting to start to build your report for them. So it takes time to develop that report and get it ready. There's also, there may be incidents, there may be events. There probably is, because, from what I'm hearing, most organizations are getting thousands or millions of pings every day of threats attempting to infiltrate their organization. And of course, we're in the cloud. I was just reading the IBM X-Force report on cloud infiltration and this morning, and the cloud is being attacked. It's not being attacked in any way that we never knew about before. But what is new in the cloud is identity and access management is more important these days. And of course, the ability to be able to use software or logical taps or collectors is a nice word, but tap is another word that we use to gather packets, to do deep packet inspection. Very, very important because the threat actors, of course, in the traditional data center, they're going ingress, egress. So it's easy to put the taps on those points and filter and inspect deep packets. But in the cloud, they're going east and west. So, and when they go east and west, then if you're detecting at the ingress and egress, you're not going to see them, right? So once they get inside your cloud, they could be creating mayhem and you wouldn't know about it. So you need to have, this type of technology in order to be able to manage the risk and monitor it, because you can't manage what you don't know about, right? So you need to be able to see it and monitor and manage it. So that's very important. But that's the sort of day-to-day stuff. And of course, there's resource. We're going to talk a little bit more about resource management. So if you have a team, you need to do some mentorship. We were talking about that at the beginning. You need to do recruiting and hiring. You need to get the right skill sets. You need to, follow up people. You don't need to be leaning over their back, watching what they're doing. But at the same time, you need to be there for them and support them and nurture them and help them grow as professionals. So that's the day-to-day stuff. And then, of course, there's budget monitoring. So this is always important. You want to make sure that whatever you ask for in the budget is getting spent appropriately, and that we don't have any sort of gouging going on or any sort of scope creep happening. And it's so important, right? Licensing, external contractors, third parties, if you have them involved. There's a lot of different types of areas that need to be checked by the manager in order to make sure that the budget is on track. If you're smart, you create a business plan and you get approval for that with the budget, and that will give you a program. If you're new to the game and you miss that opportunity to create that business plan and get that budget, then someone else is going to be dictating to you where you're going to spend money and where you're not going to. And that's going to be a little bit discouraging, because if you're a professional and you want to manage your own program, you need to have a budget for that. All right, resource management, I mentioned. So you need to have the right skill sets. You need to hire people. Sometimes, unfortunately, you need to fire them too. HR is heavily involved in cybersecurity. They have a lot of threats from cybersecurity threat actors. So HR and legal, they'll become your best friends. They'll be stakeholders in your program for sure. They sit on the governance committee. One of the senior managers from HR, usually the chief people officer, and usually the general counsel sit both on the governance committee. They have to. Okay, so that's resource management. Now, when it comes to performance management, there's a lot of different metrics that you can report on. I'm just going to talk about a few that I use. There's 6 different areas. We're going to talk about strategic alignment. So first one, in that business plan, you want to talk about these things, right? So how does your cybersecurity program support the organization? And remember, the organization could be making wedges or widgets, or they could be making medical devices, or they could be making military equipment, or maybe they're just manufacturing food, or maybe it's a logistics company. So there's lots of different companies, and you need to, in your business plan, you need to show how your program is going to support what it is that they're doing. And that also helps you to add a little clarity to what your roles and responsibilities are. Because coming in and just doing cybersecurity, you might just think, oh, it's, intrusion prevention, firewalls, and once in a while we're going to do incidents. But to run a professional program, there's a lot more to it. So making sure that the cybersecurity activities don't materially hinder the business, very important. Wow. No material hindrance. No, that's a bad thing. If that happens, you're going to be talking to the CEO probably, which will not be a good conversation. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that your cybersecurity program is doing is not turning off the finance department and the general ledger, or it's not turning off the sales team's computers and disconnecting them from the internet. So make sure that there's no material hindrance. You want to enable business activities. So a couple of the key areas that I usually get involved in is the sales and marketing team. So when they're on the hunt for new customers, the cybersecurity leader is going to play a big role these days. And after they win those customers, then the cybersecurity leader is going to also play another big role by making sure that the contract language, we want to, limit the amount of control that we have to implement. But if they're asking for ISO certification or NIST certification or something like that, then you're going to have to be able to make sure that you can do that, and you can't leave it to the legal team or the sales team, because if you do, they're going to be agreeing to do things that you won't be able to do, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So that's not good. Yeah. So you want to be involved in that process, and that's going to take some time. So that enables the business activities of growing and expanding their business and controlling costs. From a risk management perspective, you want to look at reducing significant risks. So you do risk assessments, you prioritize the risks. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then you treat the big ones. Where we have major exposures, we're going to treat those areas, okay? Also improve response time to new risks. So if there's a threat and we detect it through one of our security appliances, we want to be able to respond to that quickly before it becomes an incident, right? So that's why we do monitoring. So monitoring is very important to risk management. Business process assurance, make sure that there's no gaps. I was going to include a slide, but I forgot to. But you want to look at all your assets and identify where the risks are and make sure that your control framework covers those risks and that there's no gaps. And there could be gaps from time to time that pop up. It happens. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes you implement a control, but it's not working 100%. So, and sometimes you might implement some controls and maybe you haven't turned off a local system admin. And so the end user is turning stuff off on their laptop, like malware checking, or maybe you have firewall or VPN. Maybe they're turning that stuff off. It could create some problems for you. So you want to make sure that those gaps are closed, pardon me. And then you want to check on insurance activities and make sure that they can be demonstratable. So you might have an external resource providing insurance on an annual basis. So you may not have to do anything. You just have to plug into whatever the CFO certification process is, or SOC 2 or SOC 3 or Sarbanes-Oxley, whatever the financial controls are that you're using. Probably will touch on a lot of things that provide assurance around the business practices. So you might just have to plug in and report on that. Value delivery, make sure there's a minimum number of controls to achieve some kind of reduced risk. So, and this is very important. A lot of times I have had very interesting meetings with, some of the big four accounting firms. I won't mention any names, but they come in, they do their annual review for assurance, and then they come in and make all these suggestions on controls because they want to try and justify, I think, the invoice that they're going to be sending. And the first question I usually ask them is, but have you done a risk assessment, right? Do you understand our control framework? Do you understand how we manage risk? You're suggesting that we implement new controls, but we don't need them, right? So you need to review whatever the recommendations are. Make sure that you're not taking on too many controls, because controls cost money. And you want to make sure, pardon me, the investment in controls does not exceed the value of the asset. That's very important, asset valuation. And it's kind of a new area, again, for cybersecurity, because finance has been writing off, evaluating, different services and products, like customer lists or software, hardware. But there's other types of valuable assets, such as information and knowledge, that haven't been quantified, don't have a value yet, but you're going to put a value on it because we're not there to protect the equipment. Cybersecurity professionals are there to protect the information. Pardon me, I got a tickle in my throat and it's not going to go away. That sucks. Okay. Pardon me. Resource management. So on the resource side, we want to make sure that the frequency of a problem doesn't reoccur. And that's very important, just because we don't want to do rework. We want to make sure that the control is effective. So that's important. And then make sure that roles and responsibilities are defined, which is also very important to make sure if we can possibly implement some kind of segregation of duties. You might not be able to do that in a small shop very well, but the bigger the shop is, it should be easier to do. And then number 6, KPI, performance management. The time it takes to detect and report incidents is reduced. We kind of touched on that a few minutes ago. But it's very, very important, of course, to respond to any kind of event before it turns into an incident. And then, of course, if there's a breach, then we want to be able to shut it down. So having playbooks, having a team who's trained on how to deal with cybersecurity breaches, very important. And then benchmarking security costs. So that's probably a good strategy to do, to go out and check. You might have a third party do that just to see if you're spending enough money or you're spending too much. Just do a little survey or have somebody else do a survey of companies that are similar to yours. Okay, pardon me.
Hey, Mark, we have a couple of questions. If you think that this is a good time.
Yeah, let's take a little pause and just answer some questions if we can.
Yeah, that will be good. Okay, we have a couple of questions. The first one is that, how do you define a cybersecurity program? It is a combination of any activities conducted in an enterprise in order to obtain value from cybersecurity and management of cybersecurity risks, etc. What is your definition for a cybersecurity program?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Well, I think if I had to write a definition, it would be, so I'm not sure if you're looking for like a Webster's kind of dictionary or not, but it's the protection of information, and the protection of information in all formats, digital, physical. You could even say verbal or audio or visual, because, you record information on CCTV, you have VoIP, you record information on phone systems, and then you record system information. So all this information, we're not sure what value it has to the company. So part of the cybersecurity program is to go through, identify what the information assets are, and to assign a value to it. We know that obviously customer lists, private information, if you're worried about GDPR compliance or you're worried about your employees, HR data, payroll data, any information about executive payroll, that's going to be up there very high, or board of directors payroll. These are all types of information that need to be protected. So if you're going to define a program, you probably want to keep the definition quite high level until there's a level of maturity in your management team that can start to grasp what it is that you're trying to do. So you probably want to say something like, we're protecting information in all formats, right? Digital, physical, audio, visual. Is that what you're looking for? Is that the...
Yeah, actually, it's not my question, but I believe that response is relevant. Also, I can put some inputs here if you don't mind. And actually, it's all based on the work I'm doing now. And for all the topics you're mentioning, I literally reviewing that points, some of them working well, some of them not. I also have some special questions for you. I believe for the defining that problem, it's really important to define that end state or desired end state. Because I saw that if there's a budget in the company, everyone want to add their wishes into that programs. I literally experienced this. And one day someone just told me that, okay, guys, these are not requirements. These are just your wishes. They just want to be part of that project at somehow. I believe the best way to do that is to put that desired end state. You can have your goals and everything, but for this kind of big programs, that desired end state will show what is the to-be picture to senior management, and they can simply reject that requirements or some other involvements. Actually, I will have a question for you. I also saw this as a problem on the current project and also on many others. For these kind of huge programs, everyone wants to involve in that. Some of them providing their requirements, wishes, maybe their ambitions, but also they may want to be a reviewer for that project, process definition, everything. You know, it's cybersecurity affects simply everyone. If there's a big program, they are just saying that, okay, we have to be part of this. And because program scale is large, it's really controlled who should be part of that and who should be not. How you define that stakeholders, the proper stakeholder list? Because for large program, number of stakeholders can be unmanageable. Let's say for a document, there might be more than 30 reviewers, and it's not efficient to manage that. How do you manage that number of stakeholders?
Well, if it's too big, then you have to keep rolling it up, right? So you get the org chart, you know, and you look at the org chart and you look at all the portfolios and the executive team, right? And that's where you start. That's for the operational budget and the governance committee. But on the capital projects, you have a project charter. You might have a PMO. And if you have a PMO, then you have to write a project charter to get approval for the project and get a budget for it, right? Which includes a resource plan. So there are some controls in place, right, in order to manage that scope creep, right? Because that's what you're talking about, right? Is when you have a plan, you have a clear goal, what you're trying to achieve. But then all of a sudden, you know, Sally and Bill and Betty are all like, oh, wow, he's got a budget. I want to jump in on that one, right? And get my stuff done. That happens all the time. So, you know, when you do the stakeholder engagement thing with the business communication, you want to make sure you talk about, you know, how you're going to manage the program and stuff. So people understand. You have to start building a relationship with people, right? And they have to understand. A lot of these items go into continual improvement, you know, that are low risk. And that's where you write your capital projects. Usually it's based on what the continual improvement requirements are, because the things that are affecting us right now, it's not going to be capital. It's going to be operational budget. Like if we have an incident when we have to fix some firewalls or we have to do some work or get a forensic investigator, right? That's going to come out of the operational budget. It's not going to be a capital thing.
Also, this cybersecurity culture is one of the critical fundamental elements for any type of security project, program, or even penetration testing. It's everything, and it's still evolving. I believe we are in the middle of that conversion time. Actually, there's a question how this enterprise cybersecurity culture affects and how it is important for cybersecurity program. Also, I want to ask this in a different manner. Let's think about a big enterprise, but they are not mature in cybersecurity that much. Actually, most of the time, if company has cybersecurity program, they want to increase their maturity. That's why they are spending money on that. But the dilemma is that their culture is not mature to implement that program. And if there is a huge gap and on delivery, business as usual after that, even for the program planning, maybe for the scoping phase, you can see that there is a gap. senior management has budgets. They want to spend that budget on that program, but company is not mature enough. What can be the solution to make that company culture and program goals just to align with each other?
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged. It's complicated, you know. So you're going to have on one side, you're going to be carrying out some operational activities you're going to be doing. So you kind of have to take a gradual stage. I like to use Bloom's taxonomy as sort of an example. That's something that I use as a professor when I'm developing curriculum or exams. And you know, stage one is just, you know, basic understanding. No, it's not even understanding, it's awareness. It's like, you know, about cybersecurity. So I usually start with my communication strategy when I'm talking to people. And I start building out communication pieces. And the pieces first say, you know, do you know about cybersecurity? Did you know that it affects businesses like ours all the time? You know, so some kind of raising of the awareness. And then the next step is to improve their understanding. So a lot of people want to know what's in it for me, you know, the classic, what's in it for me, because a lot of people in a big organization don't really care, right? They have their job, they want to go do their job, they want to get paid, they want to go home, they have a family. They don't want to be bothered with cybersecurity, right? It's not, so you have to somehow make it part of them, you know? So maybe you're going to talk about, did you know that, you know, maybe one of your communication pieces will be, did you know that, you know, 60 million children a year are, you know, solicited by adults who pretend to be other children, right? How do you find that information out? How are you curious? Like, don't you want your kids to be protected when they're on the internet? So you have to find some angles, depending on the culture. And there's a lot of different cultures and businesses. So you have to be careful. I would suggest that when you're doing your engagement, your initial review of the strategy and stuff, is that you spend like a month or maybe two, if it's tolerable by the organization, just to get to know the company, just to get to know the stakeholders and start building, you know, go for coffees, talk to people, see what they do on a regular basis, because you need all that input in order to synthesize your strategy, right? And your communication plan, because that's going to be your starting point, right? And then you have to also find out, what did they do before? Has there ever been a breach here? You know, has there any been bad audits? You know, has something happened in the organization that people might be interested in? Because there's people that want to go home to their families. There's other people who care about their business because it pays their salary and they want to take care of the business, right? So, yeah. So there's many different angles. Very complicated subject, but we could spend probably another meeting on one of those, talk about communication, the stakeholder engagement.
Yeah. It's actually I believe it's for any kind of large program. It's one of the critical topic.
Oh,
and yeah. Why we talk about that?
I say the success of a program, 30% is based on business communications. If you fail in communications, your program is going to fail probably.
Yeah. Also, I observed that when we say actually change management, people are mostly talking about that technology readiness. I'm sending a couple of emails to those people, but actually the change is the culture change. If they need training, you have to train those people. You are just adding a new component, new process to their daily life. They need to get used to it. They need to feel comfortable. And I personally work on that for MFA in one of the MFA projects. It took around 3 months to train all those people. First, I need to convince them this is something you need to do. They will push back. You can't push back again because I am the consultant one. I need to get that and train them. Yeah, it's actually one of the part of changing that culture is one of the critical part. And also we have some other important, I don't want to say stakeholder, it's the suppliers that maybe contractors, other companies. About that supplier relationship management, do you think that a proper delivery partner or I don't know, a bit contractor-based model with the expert people, which one is the better fit for that? It will change, but there are pros and cons. I also agree with you for this kind of program. Definitely that company need to have a partner, if possible, and I believe it's a must that partners should have been done this kind of program before, because there are lots of unknowns and you can get that experience. Someone like you should evolve into that program. Otherwise, it's gonna fail and it will be multi-millions.
Yeah, it's sort of the third leg on the chair, is the supply chain. And I'm going to actually talk about that in this presentation too as well. And so I think first of all, you need the legal teeth to back up whatever it is that you want to do. So that's the first place you go after I don't know if your company has a contract management team, maybe they don't have a formal service level objectives or a service level agreement that touches on cybersecurity. So there's a lot of different pieces in the puzzle that need to be put in place before you actually walk in front of the supplier and say, hi, I'm here. At Morgan Stanley, for instance, I had 16 on my security architecture team. I had 16 architects, and they reviewed 4,000 suppliers every year. But Morgan Stanley, because they're a Fortune 50 company, they told people, they said, you know what, we want to review your security architecture of your business. My architects actually got access to the company's infrastructure and reviewed their architecture to make sure so there was no questionnaire. They were actually inside the company looking at their security to make sure that it was good. That's probably the best I've seen so far. I mean, in the government, we do surveys, right? And we hope that everyone's answering the survey honestly. But at Morgan Stanley, you have the clout, right? So you can say, we're coming, open your door. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's a couple different angles that I would suggest.
Okay, we don't have any other question.
Okay, guys.
Okay.
Backstage team is here. I'm just asking for 3 minutes from you for our audience to fill our survey. Mark, also you can take this 3 minutes break as a break for you to have some rest. Is it okay?
If you want to, I think I'm about halfway through the slide deck. So I know that I want to be kind of cognizant of our time too, because we said we had people for an hour and a half and we only have 30 minutes, right? So.
Okay, just then 2 minutes for survey. Yeah, this survey is very important for us to use it as a proof for CP declaration. So you can also take this 2 minutes as a break. Guys, please fill that survey. And after that, we will declare your CP to ISACA. And also you will have your soft certificate mailed directly to your mail box. I shared the link on the chat module.
Yeah, I hit the link and it seems it's working properly.
Okay, thank you.
Just wait for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, just 2 minutes. Responses are coming. Değerli katılımcılarımız, CP başvuruları için bizim CP başvurusunu yapabilmemiz için lütfen chat modülünde paylaştığımız anketi hızlı bir şekilde doldurunuz. Size sonrasında aynı zamanda soft halinde de bir katılım sertifikası mailinize gelecek. Onu da diğer sertifikasyonlarınız için de kullanabilirsiniz. Yeah, you should use Explorer instead of Chrome, I guess. if you have some problem while trying to open survey, yeah, I will check for it. Okay, it's working with Chrome. Instead of using Explorer or something else, please use Google Chrome. Ozan Ali. Okay, Mike, whenever you're ready, we can start again. We had our 2 minutes.
Unmute. All right, there we go. Okay. Thank you. Hope that survey goes well. Are you giving away a new car with that for the winner? Okay, here he's gone. Okay, so let's proceed now. We're going to talk a little bit about the governance committee. So the governance committee is usually, again, made up of leaders within the portfolio of the organization. If you create a terms of reference, it's a very formal process. It's something that I've kind of picked up over the years. It actually works out very well. It's only like 3 pages, describes what they're going to do, who's going to be involved, what the inputs, outputs are. And that gives the CEO some comfort, right? In knowing we use terms of reference in the government to make sure that committees aren't just created because people are bored, but it actually has a practical use too. The governance committee needs to know what are the legal obligations. And usually I create a legal registry and I list this. I work with the general counsel on developing this and create this. Very important for your cybersecurity program because these are your legal obligations. These are what the compliance managers are doing all the time. This is their job, and the auditors are checking. But it also needs to be integrated into cybersecurity operations to make sure whatever you're doing in the cybersecurity world is also compliant. So, and of course, there's laws or regulations that you have to follow, regulations or statutes and laws. Then there's the internal facing contracts that we have. And those are the ones where we license software and we have some proprietary responsibility for protecting information, proprietary rights. Maybe you have Oracle, maybe you have Microsoft, maybe you have some other software tools. There's usually a long list. And then there's the external facing. So those are, of course, customer agreements. We have to make sure we comply with those. So the governance committee needs to know about those. And the cybersecurity manager is the person who helps to make sure that on a day-to-day basis, that there's compliance with the regulatory, statutory, and internal facing. But he does it in a different way, or she does it in a different way. She creates like an information handling practice, and it has a number of security standards attached to it. She teaches employees both support in the IT or support areas, and also front office and sales and executives about different types of information and how they need to be protected. So the information handling practice is a really slick way of taking care of that and making sure that we have compliance all the time. That's good. And then when we do risk assessments, we create this registry, right? So we present the risk assessment, we identify vulnerabilities, the potential impact of the enterprise, who the threat is or what the threat is, and then what control it is we plan on implementing. So if you keep it to a nice, neat, tight list, like ISO 27001 or NIST or COBIT, you're going to have a list of controls, and you put those controls into a registry. Now in the ISO world, we call it a statement of applicability. And there's also another document that we use in the ISO world called the conformity matrix. And the conformity matrix maps the controls to the procedures and the managers that are responsible for it. So it's a very useful living document that I highly recommend. It makes the auditor's job a lot easier too, because you also show where the evidence is so that they can take the conformity matrix and basically find everything they need when they come in and do the audit, other than doing their interviews. And then those controls go into this registry. Very, very important process here that I'm talking about, because as I was mentioning before, you might have external groups coming in to do reviews, and then they make recommendations on controls. And the question is, do we have a control already in place? Because Remember, in the key performance indicators, we're trying to keep the list of controls that we apply to information small, and we don't want duplications and we don't want overlapping controls. So in order to make sure that doesn't happen, the cybersecurity manager needs to keep on top of that for the governance committee, and making sure that whatever risk assessments are being done are mapping to the organization. And if somebody's making a recommendation for a control that we already have a control for, they need to let them know that that's not going to be accepted because we already have something in place and the governance committee approved it. So very important to have this registry of controls in order to control the controls. Okay. When it comes to risk assessments, I use recommend a very quantitative approach. This is a 5-tier assessment. So it's not just the stoplights, green, yellow, and red, but there's also critical and extreme. And these are when you have breaches, and these tie to, of course, a service level agreement. And it helps the organization, the senior managers, prioritize what's important. So is a breach more important than maybe a high risk where there's a vulnerability that hasn't been patched? Yeah, breaches are very important. They need to be fixed right away. So extreme risks need to be fixed in 2 hours. That's a risk rating of 90 plus. And critical risk, 80 to 89 is a little bit less. So it might be like a 0-day threat that we need to get a patch for. So it's not a breach. So it needs to be categorized a little bit differently and handled a little bit differently. We'll talk about that more again. And then we set a risk appetite. So in addition to creating a governance terms of reference, the next most important document is the risk management policy. And maybe you already have one, maybe you already have a risk appetite. That's great if you do. If you don't, then you should get one, and you should have this probably approved in like the first meeting with the governance committee, is making sure that that risk appetite gets established. And what that does is the risk appetite says that if we encounter a risk that is 80 or above, we're going to treat it right away. So we have the authority to do that, and that's what we're going to do. That's what you ask the governance committee for. It's the authority to treat that, make sure it's done. And then what we also say to help balance the load a little bit, because executives like to address the things that are important, but they also don't want to address everything at once. So we need to have a cutoff point, and that's the risk rating of 80. So everything that's 79 and below goes into a continual improvement roadmap, and it's going to take, a little bit of time to fix that. And what that looks like is this. So we have extreme and critical going into risk treatment plan being monitored. They're probably going to be recorded in the service desk and assigned right away. And there's going to be a team of people working on that to close those down. But in contrast, the high, medium, and low go into this roadmap. Now, I'm telling you all about all this information because one of the important things with your strategy is to have a strategy. And this is a strategy on how to manage cybersecurity risks that I'm talking to you about. So the roadmap is something that's used for continual improvement. And the budget around the continuous improvement is a capital budget. So these are two different budgets. So you have operational budget for day-to-day, and then you have capital budget for special projects and continual improvement. And capital budgets, because the value is usually a lot higher than operations, they as it more. And then you have supply chain. So maybe you're building chips and you're selling those chips to other manufacturers. So you're gathering raw materials, and then you're building, nanoplates that are going to be used to create circuitry on the chip. And then those chips are going to be used to build all kinds of things. So, and there's going to be different groups. So maybe you're building a pacemaker, maybe it's a bulletproof jacket, maybe it's a mobile phone. There's lots of things, but there's risks throughout this process. And this is one approach, could be part of your strategy that you could use. And that's to, create a supplier list, have 5 different types of levels of risk, just like the priority risk rating scale. So for low risk, so this would be like green and yellow, we could do a survey for them, right? And maybe we could do a slightly different kind of questionnaire that's weighted with some security risks. And that could be for SSA 16 or it could be for 27,001. And there could be some kind of this weighting score comes into your risk rating process. And then you make a decision on whether you're going to treat it now or whether it's going to go into continual improvement. And then, of course, then there's the level 5. And these are the suppliers in your supply chain that are really, really, really important to your business operation. So these people need probably to be visited once in a while to have an audit done on their site. That's just one approach. And then, of course, you need to take all this wonderful risk information and put it into some kind of a system that you can use in order to manage the risks around GRC or what have you. Now, this is tier 1 of that 5-scale system. So this is the extreme rating of 90 plus if you have a risk rating. And this just gives you a little bit of insight of what's going to be going on during this process. Whoops. Sorry about that. So people are going to be working on this risk 24/7. We have some SLA goals. So there will be a monthly review with the vendor to make sure that, that they're delivering their goods and services, but also that they're dealing with the risk. And this kind of a concept is more fluid. It's not baked into, it is written into the contract that they'll follow your risk management process, right? And this is the process. They need to evaluate risks and prioritize them and treat them. Whereas some schedules and some contracts, they just have a list. Like some people take Annex A, for instance, out of ISO 27001, and they send it to the supplier and they say, you must do all of this. Or they have a privacy plan or a security plan. But those things are very stagnant. So what you're asking them to do is implement specific controls. All those controls have a value to them, to the supplier. So obviously they're going to push back and say, no, I don't want to do that, right? That's too much because it's going to cost me. And it undermines the business benefit or the revenue that we're generating from this relationship. So there'll be lots of discussion around that process, but you need to work with the legal team and make sure that you have a strategy. And this is the best strategy that I've seen, that I've used. And that is to build in your risk management process into the schedules, into the agreements. And then, of course, you have the risk rating scale, and you treat risks. That also has to be part of the schedule or the master service agreement. It says that extreme and critical risks will be treated immediately, right? And you will work with us, just like it says here, suppliers and the enterprise will work together to address this risk, and it will be addressed within an hour, right? So this is a priority 1, or this is 2 hours, sorry. And then it has to be updated right away. Okay, now talking about budgets. This is one way that I formatted budgets. It's kind of useful. It has this is a strategic budget plan, 2022 to 2027. There's different sections on this. I'm going to go over 4 different sections with you. This one is an operational. So this is all the key role players. So you have a manager, an analyst, you have somebody who does monitoring, you have an auditor, you have maybe investigators, and then you have the governance committee. Okay. So in the first year, these people are going to be, here's your head count here. So you're going to have a manager, you're going to have an analyst, if you're lucky, or the manager might be doing everything. And hopefully you have an auditor. And if you're lucky, you already have an internal auditor. So if you have internal audit, then you want to bring them into the cybersecurity program and get them to do this if they have the cycles, right? If not, you're going to have to hire an independent auditor. You can also outsource this. And then you have the governance committee. So one meeting with them a month costs you 30 grand. So you can understand why it's important to have a terms of reference, because the CEO is agreeing to let these people sit in that meeting for an hour, and it's costing him a lot of money or her a lot of money. So this is year 1. Your budget is for operations is 358,000. That's a lot of money, but you've accounted for everything. So the accountants will love you. CEO and CFO might have some questions. And then year 2, of course, you're going to grow that team, and year 3, again, grow it more. And then finally year 4 and year 5, hopefully you'll get up to headcount of 11. But of course, you're including the executives, so you only have for like an hour every 90 days. Okay. Oh. Okay. And now let's talk about another part of the budget, section 2, security hardware and software. Now, a lot of the budget for cybersecurity is about between 8% and 13% of the IT overall budget, because a lot of the things that IT does actually touches on cybersecurity. So, you know, there's monitoring, security information event monitoring, file integrity monitoring, anti-malware. You get into closed circuit television, Citrix hardware, data loss prevention, proximity guards, firewalls, and the list goes on. These, pardon me, these numbers are just fiction. I made them up, but it shows you a 5-year spend. So you want to update the schedule, and then you have an operational budget. So now you have resource management for operations, and you have an operational budget. Great. Okay, now we're going to talk about capital. So you have projects. So if you're going to have a project, you're probably going to have a project manager, and you might have security consultants. So this gets a little bit more expensive. So you can see our software was relatively quite manageable. This is very fictitious because software is not going to be that low. Labor costs are obviously the most high for operations. So, okay. But on your capital budget, you're going to have to, you know, look at the different players who are involved. And there's a way to analyze that as part of your project charter. You're going to have to break it down, right? What skill sets do you need and for how long? And do you have anyone internal, or do you have to hire someone external? So that's very important questions to ask. You also might have post-implementation resources. So you might have a register who's going to be handling your certification of your system. You might also have some testing that goes on a quarterly basis, or maybe after a big fix or a big software move. And then you have outsource costs. So you have maybe you outsource your physical security monitoring, or maybe your hardware security module, or pen testing, or on-demand security. So there's some numbers around that. So you can see the budget here. For the first year, it's always going to be a little bit higher. Second year, it takes about 3 years to mature a program. So we're talking about $1 million program, right? So obviously, if you're a small company and you're a startup, a lot of these things you probably aren't going to do, or they're going to be outsourced to somebody else. That's probably the way this will go. But as it stabilizes, you can see that the prices will come down, because what you'll stop doing is using consultants, and you'll have more full-time employees, which are a little bit more cost-effective doing the work. So that's the budget. That should go into your business plan. So that's one of the line items that I mentioned in that table of contents there, budgets. Okay, now I just wanted to touch on skill sets, because this is so important, right? So a lot of people feel that they need the CISSP to be in cybersecurity, and I kind of agree. I think the SSP is one of the best certificates that you can get. I have one, right? And I've had mine for about 17, 18 years now. So I've been a CISSP for a long time, and it was a good experience. The exam was very long, and but it was worth it. So these skills are very important if you want to have a good technical. So these are what I call hard skills. You want a good technical understanding. And the CISM. So put a little, note in there for ISACA. The CISM, we have many certificates, more now in ISACA, but the Certified Information Security Manager is a good certificate. Very high level, very generic, very general. So I think it's a good starting point if you want to become a manager, and this is where you start at. However, I created an interesting certification for Chief Cybersecurity Officer. And here's the domains based on my experience, what you need. You need at least 17. So, and so they overlap here, but these are not technical skills. These are soft skills, much like the CISM is not technical, it's a soft skill, right? CISSP is more technical. So those are hard skills, but you need governance, risk management, continual improvement skills. You need internal audit skills. You need strategic communications or business communications. You need to know how to train people. If you don't know how to do these things, you have to hire other people. So your budget is going to be bigger, right? Or maybe there's other departments in your organization. If you're a big organization, that's great, because now you can get other teams involved. And that's really, really good for engagement when it comes to a big enterprise and corporate, doing things the corporate way right? Is having all the teams involved. Hopefully they're all on side. So you might have to spend some time with building the relationships in order to have that, 100% engagement. You have documents and record management, identity and access management, incident management, vulnerability management, asset management is so important because you don't even know what the scope of the threats are or the vulnerabilities or the exposure until you have a thorough asset management system. Compliance management, very important, usually handled with the legal team. Program management, those skills are what we're talking about, right? This is how you manage a program. This is how you build a plan. These are the key skills, the keys to a successful program if you want to be a superior leader in the cybersecurity world. You need to know about knowledge management. You need to know how to transfer skills, pardon me, and you need to know what knowledge is. So, a lot of people confuse data and information together. But being a software engineer, I know that data are bits and bytes, whether they're 16, 36, 124, whatever, they're bytes of information. Those bytes are worthless, right? Somebody could scoop up bytes off the internet. It might be worthless, completely worthless. But if you take those bytes and you format them into a record, so you have a personal information record about somebody, you have their names, you have their bank account, you have their PIN number, or you have their social security number. That is a value. Okay, so information is more valuable than data. But you believe I'm getting an emergency alert? Must be an earthquake happening or something.
This is a test of the Ontario Alert Ready system.
Oh, it's just a test. Okay. Test successful. Knowledge management, very important because data makes up informational records. Informational records are used to process and analytical systems in order to develop wisdom. And wisdom is what you get from your senior management team. That type of information, where decisions are made about policies or decisions are made about strategic planning, that type of information has a higher value. And we talked about valuation of information before. So the valuation of information for your cybersecurity program is very, very important if you want to be, again, a top-notch cybersecurity leader. Then there's enterprise security architecture. Can't say enough about architecture. You need to standardize your systems and people need to understand what needs to happen. Then there's security operations where you're monitoring everything. And then there's, of course, the physical and environmental security. So hiring guards, doing security monitoring physically, guests, et cetera, so forth. Now, I wanted to close with this quote from this very important man in Turkey. To see me does not necessarily mean to see my face. To understand my thoughts is to have seen me. Very wise. Thank you very much, ISACA. If you guys want to talk to me at any time, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. You can come to my website, email me. If you scan the QR code, it'll take you to my YouTube channel and you can register there and pick up some more free knowledge. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Mark. If you have time, I have one more question for you, which is asked by Bilge Metin. He is one of our honorable members of ISACA Istanbul Chapter, also my professor in my university, and he's the man the reason why I am in the cybersecurity industry now. He asked that how do you collect data for quantitative risk calculations? Because it's a bit challenging to quantify that risk. And what is your method to collect that data to do that? You're on mute, Mark.
Yeah, you're absolutely. So a lot of organizations have no clue. So one of the first things I do when I'm implementing a new program, or even an old program, is to review their asset inventory to see if they have information assets listed, right? And if they don't know what information assets they have, like obviously some types of information are easy, like customer list and patents, financial records. all very easy to quantify, right? But some other types of information, not so much. So what I do is sometimes I'll just jump over information and I'll go directly into an inventory of the software, maybe create a software portfolio, but at least an inventory of the software. And I know from my software engineering days that every piece of software processes information. So somewhere there's a file specification or some database specification that tells me what data is in that file. And then I can do a quantitative evaluation of that. Usually the easiest way is to compare it against the competitors, right? If you don't know what the value of that information is and your senior management team probably can't guess, then you need to start somewhere. So I would do a comparison to other organizations, and then I would bring that back for ratification with the governance committee. And I would say, we've done a review. Here's your information assets. Here's the valuation. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And what's the next step?
Yeah, it's definitely makes sense. Also, in this case, isn't it much more effective to use that qualitative risk assessments, or what are the pros and cons to use that?
Yeah. So, okay. So another great question. So qualitative, I use when a company is very immature, because we talked about some companies are so new to cybersecurity, right? We talked about digital transformation. This might be one of the steps in your strategy is first you sit with people and you do qualitative assessment. But at some point you want to flip the switch and do quantitative, because if you don't do quantitative, you'll never get down to the numbers. And all the accountants here and the masters in calculus will tell you, if you don't have numbers, you can't really manage the risk because you don't know what the risk is. And if you use just basic completely on qualitative, what happens is you're basing it on people's experience and their knowledge, which is not a bad thing, but everybody's experience is different. So how do you rationalize that across an enterprise? It's going to be very difficult, challenging. It's a good starting point, but I think at some point you want to move into qualitative or quantitative, after qualitative.
Yeah. In qualitative, also the most important risk for me is that people's personal risk appetite suddenly became companies' risk appetite, but actually it's not. They're just saying it's okay, but so really it's not okay. Yeah, you're very right about it. Yeah, actually we are done with our questions. Thank you for your presentation, Mark.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me here. I hope you got something from this. That's the point of it, right?
Yeah, it was our pleasure. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your presentation.
You're welcome, Harry. Thank you.
By the way, I want to share something with you, with our audience. We have special guests from Baku chapter, which we see them as our sister chapter. It's about to be established. And also we have Maria from Sacramento chapter. She was the president of Sacramento chapter. And also we have Junaid with us here from South Florida chapter. Thank you guys for being here, for being with us. And also again, thank you, Mark, for that great presentation and for your sharings.
I just want to mention too that because of Harry's enthusiasm, I also got a call from California, Los Angeles. They're also interested in this presentation now because Harry's kind of started something here. Thanks, Harry.
Yeah, you're welcome. So have a great day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Take care now. God bless you.
Guys, also, if you have comments, feel free to share us with email or whatever you want. You can also share it via our LinkedIn profile or something else. Have a good day.